Greetings and felicitations.
Hip hip hurrah, tally ho.
Hey, baby doll.
Hey, Puddin'.
Are you ready to talk about this next episode of Star Trek Enterprise that we enjoyed watching, entitled Unexpected?
Oh, sure, this was a great one.
Let's talk about some of the details. Now, this episode first aired October 17th, 2001. We're going to also intersperse our comments of this episode with the article of the October 2001 issue of Starlog magazine, issue 291, where Star Trek Enterprise takes center stage on the cover.
And that Starlog issue was pretty good, and I like that they had the article about Enterprise.
Yeah, not only is Enterprise front and center on the cover, but also this happens to be the 35th anniversary of Star Trek. So they're saluting Scott Bakula as he leaps into the new Enterprise, but also saluting the saga of 35 years of Star Trek. So this was a jam-packed issue, not just of great sci-fi, but great Star Trek articles. The episode was directed by Michael Vijar, with writers Brandon Braga and Rick Berman, which have been doing a pretty good job so far. We know they have a background in Star Trek, and I thought this episode was very Trek.
Well, this episode, of course, is the one where Trip gets pregnant. Now the thing is, when you first watch it, though, like, because this was only the 5th episode, and I mean, I was thinking, like, really, they're going to do something silly like that, like a man getting pregnant? I mean, I think it's much better now watching it 20 years later. Now that we're familiar with the show and we know that it didn't always go into silly stuff like that.
But you know what? Look at all the times that Kirk had interactions with women. Something could have happened. I love the episode with Garrett Wang when he got the STD. Ensign Kim.
Yes.
You know what I mean, so
yes.
We've dealt with issues of sexuality with aliens previously on Star Trek. But I think this one was unique that Trip didn't even whip it out and he got pregnant.
The idea that different races, we don't know how they reproduce, and we don't know what could happen when they interact with humans. And this one, which looks like a harmless interaction, turned out to be something more. But who knew? Because these two races, the humans and the Xyrillians, had never seen each other before.
I know you right off the bat, you said you love this episode because of the teaser.
The naked Scott Bakula right off the bat. Yeah, it started off with a shower scene, probably because it was already the reputation of Star Trek that there were no bathrooms on the Enterprise. So now we get to see that there's a shower on the Enterprise. We know they do have that.
Yeah, good point. And we know that this Enterprise, it has so many flaws in it, and it shows the real world flaws. What can happen if you lose your gravity system? I think the most obvious ones that we're always going to see are people floating in the hallway. But yeah, what if you're doing something very personal? This is very problematic. So I like the realism that this show is bringing to the Star Trek franchise.
Well, even at the time, if it was played more for laughs, but yes, you do see the realism there, because it is something that could happen on these newer ships back then. Like, you never know what could fail.
Well, we've been to the Werner von Braun Space Center in Huntsville, Alabama, and that's one of the things that they go over is all the things astronauts have to do with regards to personal hygiene. And that's just the reality of space, is that you got to take care of certain business. What if these things go wrong? We know that the first man on the moon, when he had to go to the bathroom, he had to ask permission to go in his suit because they never stopped to think about it. Wait, what if something happens? Will it freeze in space? Well, like, these are all kind of details that can happen in real life. And that's one of the things that I love so much about this show. It's that it's so much more NASA based. It is the next step, possibly what we would see in real world space exploration 150 years from now. So, I mean, they're getting so many things right that are grounded in reality. And I'm loving this show on the rewatch much more than the first watch, because I'm seeing it through a more mature lens and a more realistic lens. Now, this is the first episode that is chronologically, that's an appearance of a holodeck. So the premise of this episode is, first of all, they're the ship is having a lot of problems. And they're trying to figure out what is going on with these system problems. And what do they find out is the cause of them. There was a cloaked ship that was tapped into their power system. So it was a harmless ship. They were just trying to borrow power in a unique way. And what did the Enterprise do to help them out?
What, they sent Trip over. So it was a neat idea having another ship that's hidden in their energy field where the ship wasn't detectable until the Enterprise actually went looking for it.
That's right. And I think it's curious. I'm going to refer to the Starlog magazine article because they give an outline of characters, what they expected these characters to act like. And you can tell very quickly they started making some changes or some adjustments. They make the comment about Trip Tucker. It says, "You've got Trip Tucker, our engineer. He's a colorful character," explains Braga. "He's a brilliant engineer, obviously the best of the best, but he has never really been to alien worlds before. He grew up in the Florida Keys. So how is he going to react in an incredibly bizarre alien environment? He doesn't know what to make of it. He ain't no diplomat, that's for sure. We're finding him to be a character that adds humor to the show." On the onset of creating these characters, they didn't plan on him being a diplomat. Why would they send him out to make first contact with this species?
Well, I think that was the idea. I mean, they sent him to the other ship because they needed an engineer. So it's just because he's an engineer.
First contact, though, don't you think that protocol would say, well, let's find out a little bit about these people first, and then we'll send Trip in? So I thought that was kind of odd that just send him in blindly.
But isn't that what DePaul always advises?
Yes.
To find out more first. But Archer wanted Trip to go over there, and they did communicate first. I mean,
yes,
that they were sending him there, and it was mentioned about this episode that Trip acted very different there. The way he was excited to go at first, but then when he went there, he was having a hard time, even breathing their environment.
Big crybaby the whole time. "Oh, Captain, how long have I been here for?" You're like, oh. This guy is getting to be annoying. This is something I expect out of Tilly, not out of him.
Well, see, you never liked him to begin with, did you?
At the beginning, I really didn't. I liked him better on when he mellowed out, when he wasn't so mean-spirited. I mean, he's downright mean sometimes.
The way
T'Pol.
He was in the pilot, the way he was always arguing with T'Pol.
Yes.
And then in this episode, the way he...
I mean, he's a racist in some ways. He's not a likable person.
He is, and maybe they're making him that way, kind of like McCoy, who was also from the South. Mm-hmm. And I have to mention that being what you read in Starlog from he was from the Florida Keys. I know that Connor Trenier said that at first he was told that his character is from the South, but not necessarily where, and he was trying to do the accent as some other southern state, and then later on he found out he was from Florida, and he was like, oh, well, I wasn't exactly doing a Florida accent. but that was
Florida
cute.
Is such a mishmash of people from all over.
You don't have to be a southerner to be from Florida. I mean, they're not, because people retire to Florida from the north. But yeah, and another thing about Trip being on the other ship was that, I mean, that, he was intentionally written to be uncomfortable there. They were trying to show how these people on Enterprise are new to space, and Trip was certainly new to it.
Yes.
And so he was uncomfortable there, and the people from from Picard's Enterprise wouldn't have been that way. I mean, that's the idea they were trying to convey, is how this crew is so different.
Totally. And I like how the Starlog article brings out that Mayweather has a unique perspective and an instinct about space travel that even the captain doesn't have. And you remember they had Mayweather coaching Trip. So, I mean, I really love Mayweather's character because he has so much wisdom, but he's just young. And so he has more from real-world physical dealings with the universe than many of these other crew members who just know it from a textbook. So, he's such a valuable ensign. I think in the entire Star Trek universe and I'm going to just limit it not to the books and comics, but from what we see on the screen, I think Mayweather's probably the most valuable player.
The way they created him, he was, but then the way they used him on the show, not as much. He was still one of the auxiliary characters, even though he was a regular. But I know what you mean when we think about it now, because I didn't think about it watching it the first time. Yes, Mayweather could have been a lot more useful. I think they used to Paul more in that way because she drew on Vulcan experience because the Vulcans had been in space longer than humans and had their records. I mean, she was always accessing the Vulcan database.
Now, this episode did have a little bit of everybody in there. Obviously, the focal point was Trip, but the crew was there to help him out and to negotiate how they're going to repair the ship and get him on the ship. So when he's on the ship, he meets a female alien who is very welcoming to him, and everything about the ship is so alien and so new. It's just a wonderland for him as an engineer.
He likes it, but then it's just so alien that he has the trouble breathing. And they recommend that he take a nap, and he's like, I don't want to take a nap, you know. And I could see that too. If I was in a strange place, I wouldn't want to fall asleep because you don't know what they're going to do to you while you're asleep, you know. So he really felt like he was in over his head there.
Yeah, true. I like how the Star Trek article says, will the Enterprise usher in a new set of extraterrestrials? Braga says, primarily, you will see plenty of new aliens.
Bingo.
And that's it. This is an episode where it's an absolutely new species, which I'm loving it about Enterprise, that we are truly going where no one has gone before. We are exploring different ways of doing things that are not just a redress of a different bridge. What do you think about the aesthetics of not only the aliens, but especially the interior of the ship?
It looked very different, which is, I think it looked exactly like, the look they were going for was something alien and exotic. It was very colorful, and even the aliens themselves, their costumes and their look was very original. It also looked kind of, it was very smooth and shiny and...
Yes.
I want to say like, the bright colors of the 80s, but also it still looked alien in design. So it was really cool looking.
All right, so we see this is a Star Trek first, at least chronologically, a holodeck. That crew didn't call it a holodeck, but that's essentially what it was. And we're led to believe that this is what sparked the idea of how Enterprise in the future would get the mechanics necessary and the technology necessary for a holodeck. How'd you think that was handled?
It was done well in this. They called it, they did say it was holograms, that everything was holograms. And
everything that they were saying are things that they have referenced before in Star Trek with regard to how holodecks work.
And I liked that when Trip was telling the people on the Enterprise about it, when he said he doesn't know if they could recreate any humanoid people on the holodeck.
Yep.
That was good too, that they thought about this, and the writers thought about it and said that even though they have the technology, they still might not have the 24th century technology of such a complete holodeck that like what was on the Enterprise and Voyager. So it was good that they put that much thought into it and thought, well, they could probably just create places and maybe not anything else at that time. And yes, the idea that it was aliens that had it, and they don't know. It's never been said, how did Starfleet get the idea? Did they get it just from Trip telling this story to someone? Or maybe someone else had the idea independently. So we don't know how the idea came to Earth or Starfleet, but yeah, it's nice that they were able to throw in the holodeck idea and still make it fit chronologically. They knew that it shouldn't exist yet for Starfleet, but maybe other aliens could have it.
Now, this alien woman played this game of putting their fingers in a bowl, and they were able to read each other's minds. At this point, there was no idea that this can ensue pregnancy on Trip's part.
If only he had known. And since they were reading each other's minds, it's not like she was thinking, I'm going to get you pregnant.
Yeah.
So now they know, okay, don't play alien games, okay? Don't do that.
That's it. Don't stick your fingers in slimy rocks or pebbles.
Exactly.
Trip ends up doing some repairs on the ship over a number of days. Got back to the Enterprise, and something's wrong with him. He knows, and apparently there were scenes of him having some pregnancy issues that were on the cutting room floor that were deleted for time issues. But Dr. Flock says, you're pregnant. He even brought the captain and T'Pol in. So I guess they don't have true HIPAA regulations going forward 150 years in the future.
Maybe. Or the military aspect of it could be different, too.
Okay, yeah, that's a
because I think they would have to tell Trip's commanding officer if Trip gets pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny that Trip, the first indication was having that mole on his arm. I mean, it looked like a mole to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then
it was a nipple.
Yeah, a nipple. I mean, that was funny the way they presented it on the show. It was very original. Mm-hmm. And they said that as far as we know, he's the first male human to get pregnant. I have heard something in the news about a real man who got pregnant, but it was actually someone who was born a woman and had a sex change. And so, in that way, the man became pregnant. But someone being born a man, human, has never been pregnant. So Trip was the first.
Yes, it is true. They were able to chase down, through a series of events, find this ship. But unfortunately, they found it attached to a Klingon cruiser. So that was a feat in itself, trying to negotiate with the Klingons and say, hey, you got to let go of that ship that's tagging along with you. And
isn't that something, I mean, Archer should have told these aliens, like, don't do that again. I mean, mooching off these other ships, I mean, that could get you in trouble. I mean, how did these aliens never get in trouble with that before? Mm-hmm. And yeah, especially doing it to Klingons, and they didn't realize how aggressive the Klingons could be.
How do you think the Klingons were portrayed in this episode?
Pretty fairly, I think. And this was noted to be the first time that the humans encountered aggressive Klingons, hostile Klingons on the show, as far as or being in space and seeing another Klingon ship that was hostile, even though the Klingons have already been seen on Star Trek by Archer. Yeah. Now, what did you think about the portrayal of Klingons? I
mean, my original viewing of this, I was frustrated because I wanted TOS Klingons.
Yes,
we still didn't understand what was going to happen in season 4. So, I mean, now, like I say, Rewatch is so much better when you have some understanding, real world understanding, or I should say, canon understanding on the screen. Previous to that, we were going by the John Ford books.
Yeah, we didn't know on first watch that they were going to explain how the Klingons changed.
Yes. I was hoping some for variety. Show some of the TOS type Klingons, some of the TNG type Klingons. But now, I just accept it, and I think they did a good job of, that's a Klingon that we want to see, that has some fervor behind him, but still reasonable and honorable.
That worked well. I mean, so they only showed him right at the end. So it wasn't really about the Klingons, and that really could have been another race too. But I think they're still trying to throw in familiar things just to bring more fans in to watch the show.
Well, it does say, it's funny you mentioned that, in this Starlog article, that the whole point of this show is, Brandon Braga points out, much of Enterprise has to do with Star Trek that hasn't happened yet, and much of it has to do with seeing how things came to be, from large geopolitical issues to things like transporters. Hopefully, that will be an interesting journey for the hardcore fans, but at the same time, because you don't have to know anything about Star Trek, because it begins more or less at the beginning of deep space travel, hopefully the word will spread that, hey, you don't need to know anything about the 35-year history of the franchise to appreciate the show. So they're purposely putting in things that the average, ordinary, non-Star Trek or casual Star Trek fan will be comfortable with. And this is one of those episodes that it's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Because they didn't know whether it was going to have long storylines or individual
they didn't know
episodes.
At first when they were
still struggling to figure out what the format was going to be. So as a standalone episode, one of the keys with Trip is he was going to be there for comedic relief at times. In this episode, he was comedic. And it was an entry point for the casual fan. You still know that the Klingons are a bad guy to a degree. They're still aggressive. But they brought up an interesting dichotomy to the episode.
I think Connor Trinneer did, he played the comedic parts very well in this. So yeah, we find out he can be more than just someone who argues all the time. And as far as being a starting point, I mean, it does sound like a good idea that this could have been a show to bring in new fans who didn't have to know the history of Star Trek. But I don't think that really happened in reality. I don't think this really brought new fans to the show. It was the fans that were already established, like us, who wanted to see this because it was Star Trek, and who were disappointed in it to begin with because it wasn't the Star Trek we knew.
What do you think about the idea of showing a man being pregnant? Because I remember in high school there was a poster in the nurse's office showed a guy with a giant pot belly, but it wasn't a pot belly, but just said, would you change your actions if this was you for 9 months? And it was trying to force boys into thinking that, this is serious business, getting someone pregnant. So, I think this episode is very Star Trek-ish in that it's having compassion for women, what they have to go through. We see that Trip was acting differently. He had different eating habits. That's like the moral aspect to the show we could walk away with. How'd you think they handled that?
I think it went very well. The thing is, he didn't have all the problems because he didn't gain all the extra weight and
True. Mm-hmm.
And the things I've heard women say when you're about to come full term, you have more problems, like just standing up or you feel more pain inside, the baby pushing against your kidneys, and you have constipation. I mean, other things like that.
This would be if this was a massive season-long story arc that could have been explored.
Right.
No doubt about it.
Yes. I kind of saw this more as a comedic episode. Of just showing all the funny things, the things you could laugh at of a man getting pregnant. It didn't seem like they took it as seriously. And the way and Phlox was mostly just smiling at him the whole time. Like
he viewed him as like a laboratory rat. Let's see what's going to happen.
Yeah, he did. And of course Trip freaking out, and it was played more for laughs. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if anybody was really sympathetic to pregnant women in reality from watching this, but it's just something cute and entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's look at how does this episode fit in with the entire canon of Star Trek. We already discussed holodecks, so we know that possibly, historically, this is the point where the idea is being thrown around that Starfleet and Klingons could do something with this type of technology.
They were trying to show how things could have developed. And it set a good tone of how they're going to encounter new things that they've never seen before.
Yes. This one, they don't listen to T'Pol. That is going to be a constant theme. Even though T'Pol is there as an advisor, her people have been doing this for a lot longer. The idea that Captain Archer has is this is part of the human adventure, just jump in. We see within time they're going to have to hold that back a bit.
Another thing in that Starlog article was that there was no Starfleet Academy at this time.
Good point. Yes.
Which is interesting because they did, like Hoshi in the first episode, she had been teaching. And I did kind of wonder, like, was she already in Starfleet or what? But I guess you could just pick up someone and have them be on the ship without them having any training. The way that we know that they do have in Kirk's time. So these people of course they have some training, but not years of academy training the way that we know that they have.
And a standardized curriculum.
Right. So now they just they're mostly going by the seat of their pants, just what Archer wants. He's the first explorer. That's the way he sees it.
And I'm liking that show because of this, because it's so radically different than the other Star Treks, that they're constantly just trying to figure things out.
And in this case, and the idea of Trip getting pregnant, well, they're going to encounter so many things that they just thought could never happen. Mm-hmm. That's the idea. So this was a good way to represent that, to show to show that there are going to be weird things that happen in space.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a fun episode, and I'm going to give it a thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.